Hello everyone. In our last lecture, we have discussed a brief overview of principle-based 5-step model for revenue recognition under IFRS 15. Let's recall the same quickly. Step 1 is to identify the contract with the customer. Step 2 is to identify the performance obligation, that is distinct goods and services in the contract. Step 3 is to determine the transaction price of the contract. Step 4 is to allocate transaction price to each performance obligations on the basis of standalone selling price of each performance obligation. And finally, the last step, that is step 5, to recognize revenue as and when performance obligations are satisfied. In our last lecture, we have discussed about the importance of this standard, its objective and its relevance for the stakeholder of the company. We have also covered a simple illustration on this 5-step model for revenue recognition. As promised in our last lecture, that we will be covering each step of this 5-step model in greater details with multiple illustrations and practice questions. So the agenda of today's discussion is to cover step 1, that is to identify contract with customer. Today, we are going to dive into the detailed concept behind this step. First of all, if we see the simple definition of a contract, contract means an agreement between two or more parties that create enforceable rights and obligation. It's mean contract is a promise between two or more parties that establishes their rights and obligation. Now, enforceability of the rights and obligation in a contract is a matter of law, depending upon the norms and regulations of the market in which we are operating, depending upon the local practices where we are conducting our business. Our contract can be a written contract or it can be a verbal contract. Even it can be an express or implied by the entity's customary business practices. This is the simple definition of contract. But in order to establish an agreement as contract under IFRS 15, it needs to fulfill some criteria, some attributes. Basically, IFRS 15 requires a contract to have 5 attributes. And when these 5 criteria or attributes are there in an agreement, it will be considered as contract under IFRS 15, and then we will apply the later steps of 5-step model for revenue recognition. We will discuss these 5 criteria or attributes in some time, but for the time being, we have a simple definition of a contract, that a contract is an agreement between two or more parties that creates enforceable rights and obligation. Normally, in case of two-party contract, one party, that is entity, provides goods and services to the other party, that is customer, and the customer pay consideration against those goods and services to the entity. It's mean the responsibility of the company is to provide goods and services to the customer, and the obligation of the customer is to pay consideration to the company. Now, when we talked about a contract, most of the people think that a contract should be a written contract and it is necessary to have a contract in documented form in order to be legally enforceable. But this is not necessary at all. IFRS 15 says that the format of the contract depends on the market in which we are operating. It depends on the market in which we are running our businesses. What are the norms there? What are the regulations there? What are the practices there? Or what are the local laws and rules and regulations of the jurisdiction in which our company is operating? Therefore, depending upon the market norms, depending upon the market regulation, and depending upon the market practices, a contract can be a written contract or it can be a verbal or oral contract. Even it can be in an electronic form. For example, practically when we purchase some land or building, we definitely do a written contract. But when we want to purchase something from a grocery store, then we don't do a written contract there. We just give our order verbally and the shopkeeper gives us the goods and we pay the consideration against those goods and our contract gets closed. So, if we are purchasing something from a grocery shop or some supermarket, the norm there is that contract gets concluded verbally. In the same way, if we buy something online, any goods and services from any online store, whether we have ordered something from Alibaba or Amazon or any other online platform, then in this case, the contract is not being executed in written form, neither in verbal form, but in an electronic form. So, the crux is that the contract should be an enforceable contract. It does not need to be in the written format. It depends on the market in which we are operating, the market rules, the market regulation and the market practices. And the contract can be in any form, but it should be an enforceable contract. This is the general dictionary definition of a contract that we have discussed. We need to keep one thing in our mind, that if in any contract, in any agreement, every party to the contract has right to terminate the wholly unperformed contract without compensating the other party, then there is no contract under IFRS 15. I repeat, if in any contract, every party to the contract has right to terminate the wholly unperformed contract without compensating the other party, then there is no contract under IFRS 15. But yes, in a contract, it may happen that one party has the right to terminate and the other party does not have the right to terminate. In a contract, it is absolutely possible that some parties can terminate the contract and some cannot terminate the contract. Then this can be a contract under IFRS 15. But if in our agreement, if in our arrangement, every party has a right to terminate the wholly unperformed contract without compensating the other party, then there is no contract under IFRS 15. Let me give you some example. Let's say if a student comes to me and tells me that he has seen some of my lectures on YouTube, or he has seen some of my teaching clips on social media, or he has seen some of my podcast and he is very much impressed with my teaching style, and in the coming time he will buy some course from my institute and he will get himself enrolled in a course. Then there established an understanding between me and the student. After some time, that the student may take enrollment in my course or he may not get enrolled. There is no binding contract between me and the student. It is possible that student never appear again in the future. In this case, I cannot force him for any penalty. It is also possible that I do not offer that particular course in future. Do I have promised to offer the course, or do I have an enforceable contract that I will offer the course? So, it may also happen that I do not offer the course in future, and in this case, the student cannot compel me for any penalty, for any compensation. So, the point is, if every party to the contract has right to terminate the wholly unperformed contract without compensating the other party, then there is no contract under IFRS 15. But yes, some party may have right to terminate and some parties do not have right to terminate. So this can be established as contract under IFRS 15. But if every party has right to terminate the wholly unperformed contract without compensating the other party, then there is no contract as per IFRS 15. We have a simple illustration to understand this. It says, a shopkeeper agreed to deliver 10 computers to Warner Enterprises within 3 months. As per the terms, the shopkeeper or Warner can cancel the contract any time before the delivery. And in case of cancellation, the shopkeeper or the Warner Enterprises is not required to pay any penalty. See, there is an arrangement between a shopkeeper and a Warner that the shopkeeper would be delivering 10 computers to Warner Enterprises within a period of 3 months. An agreement further states that if before the delivery the shopkeeper or the Warner Enterprises cancels the contract, they are not required to pay any penalty. So in this case, both parties can terminate the contract without compensating the other party. That means this is no contract under IFRS 15. I have also drafted a simple solution for this. Let's read it. It says, a contract does not exist if each party, either buyer or seller, has enforceable right to terminate a wholly unperformed contract without compensating the other party. As shopkeeper can cancel the contract without compensating Warner Enterprises, and Warner Enterprises can also cancel the contract without compensating the shopkeeper. There is no contract exists under IFRS 15. But once shopkeeper delivers the computer, now Warner Enterprises will be bound to pay the money, or once Warner Enterprises pay the money, now shopkeeper will be bound to deliver the computer. So until one party to the contract fulfill its duties or obligation, the contract will not be established. So far, we have discussed the general definition of the contract. Now, as I discussed earlier, an agreement need to have 5 criteria, 5 attributes. Only then such agreement will be considered as contract under IFRS 15. And only then the step 1 of 5-step model will be completed, and then we will apply step 2, step 3, step 4 and step 5. Let's see the attributes of the contract under IFRS 15. It says that an entity shall account for a contract with a customer under IFRS 15 only when all the following criteria are met. Number 1, parties have approved the contract either in writing, orally or as per the customary business practices, and they are committed to perform their respective obligation. It means that all the parties in our contract have shown their approval towards the contract. They have shown their commitment towards their obligation in the contract, and that commitment can be in written format, oral format, verbal or in any other format. For example, if there is a 2-party contract, one party promises to provide goods and services to the other party, and the other party promises to pay consideration for such goods and services. So the approval of the parties and their commitment towards their obligation is the first criteria that our contract will be made. After this, criteria number 2. Criteria number 2 is that each party's right to goods and services can be identified. It means the underlying goods and services of the contract, the underlying performance obligation of the contract should be identified. After this, the third criteria is that payment terms for the goods and services can be identified. See, if in a contract one party is providing goods and services to the customer, then obviously customer also has to make some payment against those goods and services. Now, when we talk about that payment term should be identified, then it does not mean that payment should be fixed. In most cases, we will see that payment terms or consideration for the goods and services is fixed, but payment terms can also be made variable or contingent consideration as well. For instance, it may happen in a contract that different prices may be agreed depending upon the quality of goods and services provided. For example, higher prices for better quality and lower prices for inferior quality product. Similarly, different prices may be agreed depending upon the completion of contract work, either before or after some decided deadline. So, it is important to identify the payment terms. It may be fixed payment terms or variable or contingent payment terms depending on any future event. After this, we have the fourth criteria, that the contract must have commercial substance, that is the risk, timing and the amount of entity's future cash flows is expected to change as a result of the contract. In the fourth criteria, it is said that the contract should have commercial substance, means this contract should be an arm's length contract between independent market participants. For example, in case of transaction between group companies or in case of transaction between related parties, the contract may be executed at a price that is not the market price, or the transaction is not on arm's length basis, or the transaction does not have the commercial substance. In this case, we will be presenting and disclosing such transactions according to the standard IAS 24 related party transactions. In order to have a contract under IFRS 15, it is important that the contract must have commercial substance, means it is executed on arm's length basis between independent market participants, and the contract should be executed on arm's length basis. And the last criteria is that it is probable that consideration will be recovered. It is probable that consideration will be received from the customer. Here, we will evaluate two things. Number one, the customer's ability to pay, and number two, the customer's intention to pay the amount of consideration when it is due. At times, we may have such a customer who has very good intention, never betrays, but he is going to bankrupt soon or has already bankrupted, which means that the intention of the customer to pay is there, but the ability is not there. Based on both the ability and the intention of the customer to pay, we will assess that whether we will recover the consideration of our contract or not. According to IFRS 15, if an agreement, these 5 attributes are present, only then the contract will be established under IFRS 15, and only then our step 1 is completed, that is to identify the contract with the customers. Once step 1 is completed, then we will apply further step, that is step 2, step 3, step 4 and step 5 to recognize revenue under the principle based 5-step model of IFRS 15. Now, here a question arises that what if we have an understanding with the customer, we do some agreement with the customer in which one or more of the 5 criteria, one or more of the 5 attributes are not fulfilled, then what will we do? In this case, IFRS 15 says that we should continue to assess our contract against the above criteria. If the criteria are met in the future, only then we can apply the IFRS 15 revenue recognition model. Till all the criteria are not fulfilled, we continue to assess our contract again and again after every update or interval. And once these 5 criteria are fulfilled, only then we will move to the next step of the 5-step model for revenue recognition. It may also happen that the company has some sort of understanding or agreement with the customer in which one or more of the 5 criteria or attributes are not fulfilled, and the company has already received the consideration from the customer. In this case, IFRS 15 says that the entity should recognize that consideration received from the customer as liability until the criteria for the contract are subsequently met or one of the following 2 events occur. Number 1, the entity performance is completed and substantially all the consideration, that is cash, has been collected and it is non-refundable. Or number 2, the contract has been terminated, the consideration received is non-refundable. If a contract does not meet any of the 5 criteria, any of the 5 attribute, and the company has already received the consideration from the customer, such consideration will be initially recognized as liability. Now there are 3 possible scenarios. Scenario number 1, the 5 attributes of the contract are subsequently met. In this case, we continue to apply the 5-step model under IFRS 15. Scenario number 2, the company's performance under the contract is completed, the consideration received and the consideration received is non-refundable. In this case, such consideration would be recognized as revenue. And scenario number 3, the contract is terminated and the consideration is received and that consideration is non-refundable. In this case, such consideration would be recognized as revenue. Let's take a look at a simple example to understand this. Mr. Alexander agreed on 1st March 2007 to sell 5 cutting machine to 𝗥𝗏 Enterprises. Due to some deficiency in drafting the agreement, each party's right cannot be identified. On 31st March 2007, Mr. Alexander delivered the goods and these are accepted by 𝗥𝗏 Enterprises. After 10 days of delivery, that is 10th April 2007, 𝗥𝗏 Enterprises made the full payment and the payment is non-refundable. You are required to explain when should Mr. Alexander record the revenue. Now, in this example, there is an agreement between Mr. Alexander and 𝗥𝗏 Enterprises on 1st March 2007. Under the agreement, Mr. Alexander has to supply 5 cutting machine to 𝗥𝗏 Enterprises. But there is some deficiency in drafting the contract and due to which right of the parties are not identified. That means the criteria of the contract under IFRS 15 is not fulfilled. so we cannot apply the next steps of the 5-step model. Now, on 31st March 2007, Mr. Alexander delivered the machine to Exim Enterprises and Exim Enterprises accepted the machines. This means that on 31st March 2007, Mr. Alexander has fulfilled the performance obligation under the contract. Now, even though performance obligation of the contract has been satisfied on this date, that is 31st March, but we cannot recognize revenue on this date because the criteria for the contract was not fulfilled. Then, after 10 days of delivery, on 10th April 2007, Exim Enterprises paid the consideration against the cutting machine and that payment is non-refundable. Now, in this example, criteria for the contracts are never fulfilled, so we cannot apply the 5-step model under IFRS 15. Mr. Alexander performance under the contract is already completed on 31st March 2007 and on 10th April 2007 he has received the payment which is non-refundable. So the revenue should be recognized on 10th April 2007. So till now in our today's discussion we have discussed the step 1 of 5-step model for revenue recognition under IFRS 15 in detail together with some example and illustrations. I hope I have been able to explain all these things to you. Thank you for watching.